Welcome to Adu Globe. Discover new ideas, learn exciting things, and be amazed every day. Globe. Over the past decade, the world has witnessed devastating wars and crises, from Europe's battlefields to the chaos in the Middle East and Asia's rising tension. Yet, one region seemed to stand apart: South America, long viewed as relatively calm compared to other continents. But that calm may not last forever. Fresh signals of confrontation are beginning to emerge here too. Analysts warn that what was once considered a safe distance from global rivalries might now be drawing dangerously close to the storm. Reports suggest that just last week, Donald Trump authorized a major naval deployment into Venezuelan waters. On August 20th, the White House allegedly announced 3 Aegis destroyers, USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson, saying they would arrive within days. Yet, whether they actually reached their destination remains uncertain, creating an air of mystery and doubt. A week later, unnamed AFP sources claimed more reinforcements were on the way, this time the cruiser USS Lake Erie and the nuclear submarine USS Newport News. Alongside, at least one P-8A Poseidon surveillance aircraft was reported in action, scanning the region's waters. These moves, though unconfirmed, added fuel to speculation that Washington might be preparing for a larger show of force. In 2020, U.S. prosecutors formally charged Nicolas Maduro and several of his close allies with narco-terrorism, accusing them of using state resources to protect drug cartels and smuggle cocaine into North America. These indictments were more than just paperwork. They laid the foundation for Washington's narrative that Venezuela's leadership was not only corrupt but actively tied to organized crime. As the legal pressure grew, Washington escalated its pursuit of Maduro personally. The U.S. first placed a $15 million bounty on his arrest, later raised to $25 million, and most recently boosted to a staggering $50 million, one of the largest rewards ever offered for a foreign head of state. This steady increase signaled that the U.S. wanted to show its seriousness, while also sending a message to Venezuela's inner circle: no one is untouchable. Alongside these measures, Washington began targeting Venezuela's powerful gangs. The most notorious, Tren de Aragua, was openly discussed in U.S. policy circles as a terrorist organization due to its growing transnational criminal operations. By framing both Maduro's government and the gangs under the same threat label, the U.S. tightened the narrative. Caracas was not just an adversarial regime, but a hub for global organized crime. The combined effect of these moves showed how Washington is steadily increasing legal and political pressure against Maduro. In late August, Paraguay and Ecuador took a bold step by officially designating Venezuela's shadowy network, the so-called Cartel of the Suns, as a terrorist organization. This move was highly symbolic. For years, analysts had accused senior Venezuelan military figures of profiting from narcotics trafficking under this cartel's umbrella. Now, by formally labeling it as terrorism, 2 Latin American states aligned themselves with Washington's narrative that Caracas was not simply corrupt but a direct threat to regional security. It also suggested a new willingness among South American governments to confront Venezuela's influence head-on. The United States had already been cultivating deeper ties in the region. In June 2024, Washington signed a Security Memorandum of Understanding (MO) with Ecuador, covering military aid, training programs, and counter-narcotics operations. U.S. advisors began working with Ecuadorian forces on coastal surveillance, cyber defense, and intelligence sharing. The agreement was framed as cooperative, but it also carried strategic weight. Ecuador was being drawn firmly into Washington's security orbit. By August 2025, Paraguay followed suit, signing its own security MO with Washington. The deal promised training missions, technology transfers, and financial assistance for counterterrorism programs. With Ecuador and Paraguay both on board, and both labeling Venezuelan networks as terrorist groups, a picture began to form. The U.S. was assembling a loose but growing security bloc in South America. This was not a formal alliance like NATO, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Washington was knitting together smaller partners to contain the Maduro regime and its alleged criminal allies. The optics mattered as much as the substance. The message was clear: Venezuela may not be isolated globally, but in its own neighborhood, the walls are starting to close in. In late August, President Nicolas Maduro surprised many by proposing a joint anti-drug coordination with neighboring Colombia. President Gustavo Petro voiced support, framing it as a chance for pragmatic cooperation against narcotics. Yet critics immediately cast doubt on Maduro's sincerity, linking the move to an attempt at reshaping narratives against the US-aligned bloc. For skeptics, it felt less like genuine collaboration and more like a strategic gesture to counter isolation. In a recent interview, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro pushed back strongly against US and regional accusations. He insisted that Venezuela was being unfairly portrayed as the heart of the regional narcotics crisis. According to Maduro, the real production hubs lie in Colombia, where coca cultivation and trafficking networks remain deeply entrenched. He described Venezuela as a clean nation, arguing that the narrative had been deliberately twisted by Washington and its allies. Maduro went further, describing how the drug economy functions. He alleged that narcotics produced in Colombia are transported westward through Pacific routes and Ecuadorian corridors, then funneled toward global markets. According to him, Venezuela is not the channel, it is being scapegoated while other trafficking arteries are overlooked. By emphasizing these alternative routes, Maduro sought to recast the blame, shifting attention away from Caracas and toward its neighbors. The Venezuelan leader also pointed to the financial side of the equation. He claimed that profits from the drug trade are not reinvested locally but are instead laundered in the United States, passing through financial institutions that thrive on illicit flows. By stressing this, Maduro framed the issue as a structural hypocrisy. While Washington condemns Caracas, it allegedly benefits indirectly from the very trade it denounces. In 2018, US and UN reports highlighted the massive flows of cocaine being trafficked northwards. Hundreds of tons were smuggled into the United States each year. According to UNODC assessments, the street value of these shipments reached into the tens of billions of dollars, while global laundering networks recycled the profits through offshore accounts and Western financial hubs. This data framed the drug trade not just as a regional security issue, but as an international economic machine. Venezuela's Interior Ministry announced in October 2021 a significant counter-narcotics operation in Zulia state, near the Colombian border. Security forces claimed to have destroyed 8 clandestine laboratories, seized roughly half a ton of processed cocaine, more than 10 tons of coca paste, and eradicated 32 hectares of coca crops. While presented as proof of Caracas's efforts, analysts noted that the existence of such large-scale labs and cultivation within Venezuela contradicted the narrative of a clean territory. CNN's 2018 investigative project visualized trafficking by radar mapping. It showed aircraft flying from Venezuela and Colombia, hopping across the Caribbean toward Central America, Mexico, and eventually the US. The radar blips painted a picture of an airborne highway of narcotics. This made it difficult for Caracas to maintain that it was outside the equation, since many flight corridors originated or transited through Venezuelan territory. Research and intelligence reports across the past decade have pointed to the presence of Colombian armed groups, FARC dissidents, ELN factions inside Venezuelan territory. These groups are accused of running safe havens, recruitment camps, and logistical hubs. Their involvement in narcotics adds another layer of complexity, blurring the line between insurgency and organized crime. The suggestion is clear: Venezuela may not just be a corridor, but a staging ground. By 2023, UNODC and regional surveys mapped coca cultivation. Colombia led with approximately 250,000 hectares, followed by Peru, approximately 90,000, and Bolivia, approximately 30,000. Venezuela, though far smaller, was recorded with hundreds of hectares under active cultivation. While not at the scale of its neighbors, this still undercut Maduro's sweeping claim of purity. Even limited hectares demonstrate domestic involvement, especially when tied to trafficking corridors and insurgent operations. Taken together, seizure data, Venezuelan crop eradications, radar flight paths, insurgent presence, and comparative cultivation figures, the evidence contradicts the idea of a completely clean Venezuela. Instead, it paints a picture of a multi-layered ecosystem, production concentrated in Colombia, but with Venezuelan corridors, protection networks, and localized crops feeding the trade. This contrast is at the heart of the debate. Washington argues evidence points to complicity, while Caracas insists the data is distorted for political ends. According to Insight Crime's 2022 report, the Venezuelan government did not simply attempt to block drug flows, it sought to control them. This control was leveraged to reward local and military networks, becoming part of the regime's survival strategy. In this way, the drug trade evolved into not just an economic resource but also a political lifeline. Venezuelan journalist and security analyst Javier Mayorga has argued that drug enforcement inside the country operates under a selective pattern. Instead of an across-the-board crackdown, authorities reportedly act with intensity against certain trafficking groups, while others appear to be tolerated or left untouched. This perception reinforces claims that enforcement is often influenced by political or institutional calculations, rather than applied uniformly under the rule of law. Such uneven pressure creates an environment where criminal networks adapt, survive, and in some cases even thrive under tacit protection. Officially, the United States presented its naval deployment as a counter-narcotics mission, aimed at stopping the flow of drugs across the Caribbean and Atlantic routes. According to CBS journalist Charlie D'Agata's sources, 2 of the 3 destroyers were already assisting the Coast Guard with anti-narcotics operations for months before the announcement. This suggested that the sudden declaration was less about starting something new, and more about reframing existing operations under a louder, more political message. In essence, the military presence carried a dual role: on the surface, tackling drug trafficking, but beneath, sending a clear signal of American pressure. Analysts, however, saw this move differently. Phil Gunson of the International Crisis Group noted that the deployment was more posturing than preparation for attack. In his view, the ships were not positioned for an invasion but to create diplomatic leverage and psychological pressure. This naval show of force fit into Washington's broader strategy of negotiations through intimidation, demonstrating strength without triggering direct conflict. For many observers, the message was not about cocaine shipments, but about signaling to Venezuela's leadership that America could escalate pressure at will, reminding them that the balance of power on the seas remained firmly US-dominated. On August 19, the Venezuelan government announced the mobilization of an extraordinary 4.5 million militia members across the country. Officials framed this as a defensive measure, a way to show that any external threat would meet mass resistance on Venezuelan soil. Alongside this military-style messaging, Caracas took its case to the diplomatic arena. At the United Nations, Venezuela formally requested action to halt what it described as Washington's provocative naval deployment. This combination of domestic mobilization and international appeal highlighted how Maduro's government sought to balance forceful rhetoric with appeals to global institutions. Just a week later, on August 26, Venezuelan officials doubled down on their show of force. The government unveiled the deployment of key drones for surveillance, alongside naval patrols and the movement of larger warships northward. These announcements aimed to project readiness and deterrence, signaling that Venezuela was not merely responding symbolically but actively enhancing its military posture. For observers, it raised the question of whether this buildup was sustainable defense preparation, or strategic performance designed to counter US messaging. When it comes to air power, Venezuela's combat aviation looks more like a patchwork than a modern fleet. A handful of aging F-16A fighters remain in service, but they are far from state-of-the-art. The older F-5s have been retired, leaving the Su-30 squadron as the country's most formidable asset. These Russian-made aircraft can deliver serious firepower and provide some deterrence, but limited numbers and maintenance challenges restrict their effectiveness. Alongside them, Venezuela continues to rely on Soviet-style helicopters, versatile but outdated by international standards. This mixed composition highlights both strengths and vulnerabilities in Venezuela's skies. At sea, Venezuela maintains a modest but capable navy. Its Mariscal Sucre-class frigates are equipped with Otomad Mk-2 anti-ship missiles, Aspide surface-to-air systems, and Mk-32 torpedo launchers, giving them layered defensive and offensive options. The Guayquerí-class corvettes bring advanced Thales SMARTS Mk-2 radars and TACTICOS combat systems, improving situational awareness in coastal waters. Supporting them are smaller littoral patrol boats, better suited for short-range missions. On land, the balance shifts. Venezuela fields more than 300,000 active and reserve personnel, along with inventories of tanks, armored fighting vehicles, and artillery. While not cutting-edge, These numbers form a credible deterrent, especially when combined with difficult terrain. Despite Venezuela's visible forces on land, sea, and air, the overall balance tilts heavily toward the United States. In any coastal confrontation, U.S. naval strike groups would enjoy overwhelming technical and capability superiority, from precision-guided munitions to advanced air defense and surveillance networks. However, a large-scale ground invasion would be another story. Venezuela's geography, mountains, jungles, and dense urban centers, combined with the sheer number of personnel available, would make any deep offensive operation extremely costly. This reality underscores a crucial point. Washington can project power offshore with ease, but translating that into decisive control on Venezuelan soil would be far more complex. The standoff between the United States and Venezuela is escalating with every move. What began as naval deployments and counter-deployments has now become a test of resolve, with both sides signaling strength. Analysts warn that this tension could quickly reshape regional stability, pulling neighboring states into a new era of uncertainty. The key question is no longer just about ships or soldiers, but about how long both sides can hold this line without tipping into confrontation. The outcome of this standoff will not only affect Venezuela and Washington, it could redefine the balance of power in the wider Caribbean.